So I want to take you to the eastern Himalaya. This is a place where some of the highest mountains in the world are cut through by the sort of great rivers of Asia that pour off the Tibetan Plateau and create this extreme topographic heterogeneity, high mountains and deep gorges. At the center of this is Yulong Mountain in southwest China. And this is sort of a microcosm of this elevation gradient. From the tops of Yulong summits, elevation drops about 3,000 meters over only 20 kilometers as you get down towards Lijiang City down here. So this is an area of sort of superlative temperate plant biodiversity. And it's also an area that encapsulates a big rural to urban gradient. And this gradient is especially strong for the indigenous people in the area, the Naxi people, whose communities range from very urban in Lijiang up to some very rural and disconnected villages up on the mountain slopes. So I was there in 2010 to 2013 working with Naxi colleagues and participants to document as part of a bigger project how indigenous knowledge and indigenous language can package information about the environment and act as a framework to understand and process and respond to climate change. A couple of these papers are here. However, as I was conducting interviews as part of this work, I found myself a lot of the time in spaces like this area on the bottom right, inside people's courtyards in their houses talking to them about plants. And I could see that these were very richly flowered places. And I knew a lot of these were sort of common garden or household plants, popular around the world. But I could see, because I was spending a lot of time in the Alpine, that many of them were interesting and uniquely high mountain plants that people had replanted into their domestic areas. People also told me that many of them had medicinal or ritual uses, and that sometimes they themselves had collected them from up on the mountain and brought them down in. And I want to emphasize that these are in a strongly domestic context, right? These are within four walls, almost always. And they share a lot of important aspects, as I'll cover later, with domestic houseplants. Their location, the predominance of container plants, as you can see here, and in strong links to gift networks, which is something I think we all share in the plants we grow on our kitchen windowsills and whatnot. But there are also similarities to sort of more classical home gardens, as we talk about them in the ethnobotanical literature. For instance, bringing wild plants into this domestic context, and the predominance of plants with these utilitarian natures. And there are also influences on these areas from the more classical Chinese landscape gardens, even though these are in a non-landscape context. So certain plants are shared between these important plants, and you'll see design elements such as this river stone mosaic floor pattern, which is shared with traditional Chinese landscape gardens. And these are also an area that was very attractive to us as ecologically oriented ethnobotanists because they were seemed extremely relevant to systematic sampling. They're squares, they're about similar sizes, they're easy to differentiate, and the knowledge holders, the people who manage these gardens, were always eager to talk about them and share information. So this was a very attractive way to begin to answer broader questions for us about how indigenous plants and their uses and the language that was used to talk about them are all interwoven in this very domestic context, and how wild collection from the mountain was connected to use patterns, and how the rural to urban gradient can affect this, and ultimately how urbanization is going to affect this botanical and ethnobotanical landscape. So I just gone over those sort of subsidiary questions. The bigger question then is, are these plants that make up these courtyard gardens just decorative plants bought from the marketplace, or do they comprise this more interesting set of Himalayan mountain flora? So we answered these questions working with a group of Naxi British and American students in 3 areas in Lijiang City, 3 neighborhoods that I'll talk a little bit more about in detail later. Those are Dongjian, Beidenpo, and Guchang. And then 3 villages in more rural areas, and on an increasing gradient of being more and more rural and higher elevation, Baisha, Yulong, and Wenhai. In each of these, we randomly selected 10 houses and talked to the main managers of the garden there about every plant or planting in the garden, asking for Chinese and Naxi names, uses of the plants, and their origins. So we photographed every plant. We couldn't take vouchers of everything in everyone's gardens, but we did photo vouchers of everything. So this is what that looks like for one specific plant. This is Potentilla fallans in Xiaolang's garden. He explained that it was a tolerated weed, so it had a spontaneous origin, but that it was named in Naxi and used as a medicine. When we aggregate across the several thousand of these that we recorded, we find that there are between 15 and 40 genera per garden. There's a very weak relationship with garden area. I was surprised this wasn't stronger. The R-squared value is about 0.09, and it only holds if you drop outliers. So there seem to be other things such as age driving this that I don't quite have time to talk about now, but I'd happily take questions on. So to get right into the questions that I think have some broader relevance, are wild collected plants more likely to be useful? This was a mixed answer. In some cases, for medicinal plants that I've highlighted here, medicinal plants are more than 3 times as likely, wild collected plants are more than 3 times as likely to be medicinal. However, you can see there's an inverse pattern with food, that food plants are often bought at the market. I also want to point out this category that actually was not one we started the project with, of gift plants. We thought we'd be contrasting sort of market-bought plants with these things collected from the mountain. But we actually found that the majority of the plants we saw were gift plants from some people's social networks. And that's something we look forward to exploring more, and I think is a very generalizable pattern. One example of this pattern of medicinal plants being more likely to be well collected is Paris polyphylla. This is something that I think has a lot of analogs to what Eric and others from his group were talking about. This is always collected from the mountain. The root is highly medicinal in traditional Chinese medicine. And in fact, it's now almost impossible to find growing on the mountain. I saw one once in 4 years of working in montane environments there, and someone had literally just pulled it from the ground and offered it to me as a specimen. So in this context, I think people are starting to experiment with growing this within their gardens, partly to get away from this competition for harvest. And technologies like the shade crop you can see here could be important in trying to promote ex situ cultivation of this in ways that you guys have talked about in much more detail. Another example here that I'll only touch on briefly is Plantonia angustifolia. So this was one that was not well known. It was only encountered in one garden and was reported there to be used as robes of vine and for treating animal wounds. But when we dug deeper, we saw this wasn't just a one-off, that this was in fact something that was documented almost 100 years ago by Joseph Rock as in the traditional Naxi ideographic script somewhere between a Chinese and Egyptian hieroglyph as being an important medicinal and utilitarian plant. So our second question was about language, knowledge, packaging. We found that plants with Naxi names, where there was some name in the local Naxi language reported, were almost 2 times likelier to have some use. And again, when I say use, I mean use other than decorative. I realize that's an important use, but I was trying to get at things beyond just decorative purposes. One example of that is Burkinia purpurascens, Ziga in Naxi. The one on the left is in its natural habitat of the area, 4,000 meters above sea level, but it transplants down into gardens very easily. And you'll often see it grown in the US. Here it is in Vancouver, BC, growing at 40 meters above sea level. This was a plant that was always reported as medicinal and only ever reported with a Naxi name. Okay, so we also had this question about the rural-urban gradient. So here are the 6 villages we worked in. On the left are the ones that we thought of as most urban, Dongjiang, Gucheng, and Beikopo. And on the right are the 3 rural villages in increasing order of rurality. This is a non-metric multi-dimensional scaling. Basically what you need to know about this is that points are closer together. That means they share more plants on the upper pane. If points are closer together on the lower pane, that means they share more reported uses. Each point is a household garden. And you'll see that I've colored them and drawn lines to indicate the areas. So essentially, you can see that for both plants and uses, the urban areas overlap. They share much of the plants and uses. And the 3 rural areas are more differentiated from one another, and they're differentiated along that rural gradient. The exception is that for uses, you can see that Baishop, which is a road-connected rural village, actually is completely overlapped with the urban areas. To get into this in a little more detail, we can look at some specific metrics of what's in these gardens and what it's doing. One thing that surprised me was that we see almost no pattern, so the top pane here, almost no pattern with differences in number of species and richness. I'm sorry, I should say number of genera across the different areas. However, in certain other areas of knowledge conservation, we can see big patterns. So the ratio of Naxi names to Chinese namestones for plants increases greatly over this gradient. The percent of plants wild collected increases. And the percent of useful plants is higher, especially in Yulong and Wanhai, the 2 high elevation villages. And I'll just briefly point out, I'm not going to talk about food right now, but medicinal plants is also much higher in Yulong and then especially in Wanhai. And I think this is connected to a similar sort of value as Eric was talking about. In this area, sort of wild is high elevation, and so high elevations are really associated with medicinal plant species. To the extent that I want to talk about this example, Lijiang Valley, a medicinal plant species of great economic value that I only saw in the high elevations, and was surprised to learn is native to Peru and was being pushed by a local herb company, but as a high elevation medicinal profit species. So this leads into my final point I just want to make, which is, of course, traditional systems are important and can be conserved, while at the same time adopting new elements, as with the maca on the previous slide. So we have here an imported traditional medicinal Tibetan snow lotus and an imported ritual plant Artemisia drying on the left, but of course a newly introduced crop of maize drying on the right, and newly introduced technologies that keep wooden houses safe from burning down. So these things are all affected by not just people's choices about plants they use in efficacy, but also by political histories and architectural styles and people's livelihoods. So despite these changes, there's a lot of interest among Naxi in supporting traditional knowledge, and this includes both ethnobotanical knowledge and language. And so I just wanted to finish then quickly by pointing out one thing that we're working on now that was something the community asked for. Actually, our people we were working with as translators and field assistants requested this, which was what we call a talking dictionary. And this is something that we loaded up with ethnobotanical information to start with, and we hope to expand it. I think I can play the sound file. Yeah, so you could hear Mulan Zeng Yitzeg, the Jackie Carpus poem. So I owe a lot of thanks to other people, and including funding from Royal Horticultural Society and School of College. Thank you.